The Subcommittee for Indigenous Peoples of the United States will now come to order. The Subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on the irreparable environmental and cultural impacts of the proposed Resolution Copper mining operation. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chair and the ranking minority member. This will allow us to hear from our witnesses sooner and help members to keep their schedules. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent to all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they're submitted to the clerk by 5 p.m. today or the close of the hearing, whichever comes first. Hearing no objections, so ordered. I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today, especially considering the difficulties the coronavirus outbreak has caused for all of us. Today we'll examine the detrimental effects that the proposed mining operations will have on tribal, historical, cultural, and sacred sites located in southeastern Arizona. A few weeks ago, we had a hearing on the destruction of sacred sites that's occurring during the construction of the border wall on the southern border. Unfortunately, the destruction of those sacred sites is not a unique case. We're here again today to discuss a disregard for the rights of Native Americans and the destruction of their sacred sites, this time for the construction of a new, dangerous, and destructive copper mine near the town of Superior, Arizona. The legislative language that enabled this mining operation has a history dating back to the 108th Congress in 2005, and tribal position has been there since the very beginning. That's because the land that this mine would destroy includes the Chichiliblida-Gotel Historic District, known more broadly by its English translation, Oak Flat. Located in the Tonto National Forest, the historic Oak Flat area is a sacred site to many tribal nations where they conduct religious and cultural ceremonies and gather traditional medicines and food. This land is sacred, not only to the San Carlos Apache tribe, which is represented here today, but the Tonto Apache tribe, the White Mountain Apache tribe, the Yavapai Apache Nation, the Yavapai Prescott Indian tribe, the Gila River Indian Community, the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian Community, the Hopi tribe, and the Pueblo of Zuni. This land's sacred status has been broadly recognized, including by the National Park Service, when it listed Oak Flat on the National Register of Historic Places in 2016. In fact, the area has been explicitly protected from mining interests since 1955, when President Dwight D. Eisenhower withdrew it from potential development. In 2014, a rider of the National Defense Authorization Act authorized a land exchange giving Oak Flat to a multinational mining conglomerate called Resolution Copper, which is owned by Rio Tinto and BHP. The language in the NDA required that the Forest Service produce an environmental impact statement, or EIS, to evaluate the effects of the mining plan before the exchange occurred. However, it also stipulated that the land is to be removed from the Forest Service jurisdiction and placed into the hands of Resolution Copper within 60 days of the completion of the EIS, regardless of the findings. This is absurd and completely backwards. The NEPA process should have been followed before any land exchange was agreed to, not after. Instead, today we'll be examining a draft EIS that, despite demonstrating some of the damage this might will do to our environment and sacred land, will not be able to stop this project from moving forward. The draft EIS describes Resolution Copper's plan to extract 1.4 million tons of copper ore from Oak Flat using a destructive mining technique known as panel caving. This technique will create a massive crater that will directly and permanently damage the Oak Flat area. The crater is projected to start to appear in year 6 of active mining, will ultimately be between 800 and 1,100 feet deep and roughly 1.8 miles across. If you want to try to picture that, this mine will create a hole that is twice as deep as the Washington Monument is tall, and that will stretch the distance between the U.S. Capitol and the Lincoln Memorial. And in this crater of destruction will be the sacred site of the Apache people. And this crater will be the ancient emery oak groves, which have been used by tribal members for millennia. In this crater will be ancestral burial grounds of the indigenous peoples of southern Arizona. As there has never been a complete survey of the area, it is difficult to know exactly how many cultural resources may be destroyed or swallowed by this crater. But it's not hard to know the hurt and trauma this will inflict on the Native people who hold this place sacred. In addition to the destruction of sacred sites, this mine will have environmental impacts that would last for centuries. Unchecked groundwater pumping would deplete the area of water resources, contributing to water shortage crisis that Arizona is already grappling with, and depleting sacred springs in that area. The operation will also produce 1.3 billion tons of toxic tailings, which will be pumped through pipelines to yet to determine storage facility. All in all, this mine is an environmental and human rights disaster in the making, and the land exchange should not be allowed to move forward. Thank you again for being here, and look forward to hearing your testimony. I would now like to recognize the ranking member for any opening remarks. Our ranking member has decided not to join us, so we will continue into witness testimonies, and please, the chair, let's transition to witness testimonies. So now I'd like to transition to our first panel of witnesses. Under committee rules, oral statements are limited to 5 minutes, but you may submit a longer statement for the record if you choose. When you begin, the lights on the witness tables will turn green. After 4 minutes, the yellow light will come on. Your time will have expired when the red light comes on, and I will ask you to please wrap up your statement. I also allow the entire panel to testify before we question the witnesses. The chair now recognizes Ms. Naylin Pike, a member of the San Carlos Apache Tribe and a youth organizer for Apache Stronghold.
Thank you. My name is Naylin Pike, and it is an honor today to testify before the subcommittee on behalf of the Apache youth. Thank you, Chairman Gallego and Ranking Member Cook, for convening this important hearing. I'm a member of the San Carlos Apache Tribe and reside on the San Carlos Apache Reservation in rural southeast Arizona. I am Chiricahua Apache, and my family has lived in what is now southeastern Arizona since time immemorial. The United States Cavalry has forced my people from the land and onto the reservation in the late 1800s as prisoners of war. While we had to leave our sacred places at gunpoint, these areas still retain their spiritual, cultural, and historical connection to the Apache people. I am here today to advocate for my land, my religion, and my home on behalf of the next generations and the generations yet to come. This is a picture of Chichilpilsagal, or Oak Flat. At least 8 Apache clans and 2 Western Apache bands have documented history in what is today known as Oak Flat and Apache Leap. Apache people are deeply connected to our traditions and to the land that we have called home since first put here by Yosen, the creator. My people have lived, prayed, and died in Oak Flat and Tonto National Forest for centuries. My great-grandmother has lived along Oak Flat's ridge and the river which runs down from the north. Today, Apache people come to Oak Flat to participate in holy ground and sunrise dance ceremonies, to pray, to gather medicine and ceremonial items, and to seek and obtain personal peace and cleansing. I have been brought to Oak Flat my entire life. My family would come together for prayer, ceremony, and to collect the acorn and berries, and as to live free as Apache people once were. I still feel that strong spiritual connection to Mother Earth, Nuggle Sun, and to Yosen. At Oak Flat, it is who I am and where I am free to be Apache. It is not just the wind that hits my face or my feet hitting the ground. It is the spirits who are talking through the wind to show that they are here with us, that resonates with us, and my feet waking up the earth, telling the spirits back that we are still here and we are still fighting, not ready to give up. When I am at Oak Flat, I see what the Creator has blessed us here with, and that Yosen has touched this place. Oak Flat is one of the sacred areas where Apaches hold the coming-of-age ceremony for girls to make their entrance into womanhood. My sunrise dance ceremony was one of the most pivotal moments of my life and forever changed who I am and how I see this world. On the first day of my ceremony, I made the 4 Apache breads for the medicine man and my godparents. My godmother helped me dress into my traditional clothing and stayed with me for the entire ceremony. During this ceremony, I had danced alongside my godmother, godfather, and partner by my side. I hit the ground hard with my cane to the drumbeat that woke the mountains, the spirits, and the gons, which are also known as angels, bringing them back to life. Without them, the Apache people cannot conduct our ceremonies. I awoke the gons and danced beside them with tears running down my face. On the 3rd day, my partner and I danced underneath the 4 sacred poles. This is when I became the white painted woman. My godfather and the gons painted me with the gledge. In our creation story, the white painted woman came out of the earth, covered with the white ash from the earth's surface. With my face completely covered, my godmother wiped my eyes with her handkerchief. Once my eyes were opened, I looked upon this world not just as a little girl, but now as an Apache woman. It is our religious right to be able to practice our ceremonies in our sacred places. If Resolution Copper proceeds with the mine to Oak Flat, it will become a giant crater. Without the land, who are we as Apache people? The land will subside and the earth will die. How will we be able to practice our ceremonies at Oak Flat when it is destroyed? How will we harvest the acorn planted by Yosen when the trees are gone? How will we collect the sacred water from the springs when it is poisoned? The Gon will no longer live at Oak Flat. and the destruction will be irreversibly to destroy the sacred Chichil. The food, the medicine can never be replaced, nor can they ever be relocated. I am proud to be a member of the Apache Stronghold and to be standing up and making my voice heard on behalf of the Apache and other indigenous youth. Today, young people are standing up to protect our religion and way of life that has been under attack for far too long. Through massacre, forced removal from the land, and mandatory boarding schools, the United States has tried to silence Native voices and suppress our culture. I am here today to say that the next generation will not be silenced. I will no longer be silenced. In the DEIS, the Tonto National Forest discusses the Apache way of life in the past tense as if it's an ancient history. I hope Congress understands that the Apache way of life is not just history, but it's also present and future. Today, Congress has the opportunity to uphold the treaty and trust responsibility to the Native people and to tell a foreign mining company that our land is not for sale. My culture is not for sale. My religion is not for sale. My people and my future is not for sale. Congress has the opportunity to stand up for religious rights, for indigenous culture, and for the environment in the face of certain massive destruction that will be forever. And the time is to act now, not only for my generation, but for the generation yet to come. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the Honorable Winsor Nosey, Sr., the former chairman of the San Carlos Apache Tribe and the founder of Apache Stronghold.
Thank you. Thank you to House. Thank you for the House Committee to have this hearing, and I want to let you know that within my hand I hold what we call haritin, the yellow powder. I want to give thanks to the people across this country who are in prayer. I want to give thanks to all the men in this country who are sweating at this time. And I want to give thanks to the people that have congregated on Oak Flats since last night for prayer about what is occurring here. So I want to thank the Creator for that and all the people in attendance and you all here. I've come here years and years and years saying the same thing, preaching the same words about the neglect of NEPA and how it has affected not only our people, our religion, but our country, and how it would set the example of devastation for the rest to follow when it comes to corporations. We're talking about a religion. We're talking about angels, a saint. We're talking about a sunrise ceremony that's no different when we talk about Lady of Guadalupe, the Virgin Mary. Similar to that, of how life was given at that point. Young men come into ceremonies, into young manhood. The oak trees will stand 800 years old and seen life and still produce their first acorn to provide meals for the people. Medicine plants that are there for the people, like what we're facing here today. What America doesn't know, that a lot of these companies come to Native Americans to find medicine, to find those things. Well, these places are being destroyed in these holy places. The water, the giver of life. We're talking about water that's a part of the great ceremony that brings in the coming of the world. And now today we know that we have to live with water, and that's going to be destroyed. And then the mountains. I wish some of these people would come with me and sit on the mountaintops and see how the wind comes from the south, from the west, and how these mountains move the wind to assure that certain places receive their abundance of water. Leaders don't seem to know that. And that's why we sit here today, because it's affecting the world in a spiritual way. And this was what brings us here, being that immoral injustice has been done on the religious side of this, and that we are all a part of this now. My religion is your religion. Your children are my children. So when it came down to the tribe entering this argument, the tribal government relied on the United States with NEPA. And if you look at the record, you see how many times they made an attempt to get an exemption from Congress and were denied. Were denied. It wasn't until a late night rider was slipped for us to sit here, for my granddaughter to sit here to speak, and everyone to pray, be in prayer today because of that, because of this NEPA law that could have provided all the information from the religious perspective and from the corporate perspective, because those things are really essential. Now, we need to understand what brings us here. What brings us here in this argument is power and greed. Then we say about the deception, how things were created, and how people are not told the truth. And in Arizona today, in these public hearings, 98.9% of the people disagree. The reason why they disagree now and not then was because no plan of operation was given to anybody, just jobs and money, taxes. So people fell for that. But they didn't realize all the impact of devastation that it's going to bring, which you will hear in the next panel. But the important part is that there are places in America that you cannot destroy. Now, here, we're talking about a time of a people that had a way of life, and then were put as prisoners of war. And then now, we're dealing with the after effects that we were vacated out of these homelands that were our holy places. So what fears me the most is my grandkids, to bear their children, because as people in this country can go back to Europe and appreciate what's in the Bible about what's holy in these holy places and visit Mount Sinai, which is no different from here. These places are holy as equal to those places. Because even at that time, Yosen, who's known throughout the world by many names, but who is God, had blessed this place no different than any other place. So if we are going to call this place home, then we need to begin to treat these places like home. So what's going to be destroyed is our people. And what our people before me have said was that the last battle of our existence would be our religion, that the religion will be taken from our people, and we must stand all together to assure that we do not destroy the precious gift that God placed in this world. So again, I want to thank you for the opportunity for being here, and I look forward to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nossi. The chair now recognizes Mr. Kevin Alice, the Chief Executive Officer for the National Congress of American Indians.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Cook, and members of the subcommittee. On behalf of the National Congress of American Indians, I'd like to thank you for holding this very important oversight hearing. Again, my name's Kevin Alice. I'm an enrolled citizen of the Forest County Potawatomi community in Wisconsin and current Chief Executive Officer of the National Congress of American Indians. Founded in 1944, NCAI is the oldest, largest, and most representative organization in the country serving the broad interests of tribal nations and communities. Core to NCAI's mission is its commitment to securing tribal traditional cultures, ways of life for our descendants. The United States has a legal and moral obligation to protect sacred sites and cultural resources. But despite this obligation, a late rider in the FY15 National Defense Authorization Act authorized a land exchange that would transfer public land in the Oak Flat area of Tonto National Forest to Resolution Copper, which is a foreign subsidiary company privately owned by a couple of mining corporations. Today, my testimony will address Congress's fiduciary obligation to protect tribal resources and emphasize tribal opposition to the transfer of Oak Flat area. Tribal nations have unique legal and political relationship with the federal government, as defined in the U.S. Constitution, treaties, statutes, court decisions, and executive orders. Through its acquisition of tribal lands and resources, the United States formed a fiduciary relationship with tribal nations whereby it recognized a trust relationship to safeguard tribal rights, lands, and resources. This responsibility includes the important protection of tribal historical and cultural resources as provided in numerous statutes, executive orders, and departmental policies. Congress, in the National Historic Preservation Act, stated that it's the policy of the federal government, in cooperation with other nations and in partnership with Indian tribes, to provide leadership in the preservation of prehistoric and historic resources of the United States. As mentioned by the chairman, since 1955, the federal government has restricted mining within Oak Flat. And in 2016, Oak Flat was placed on the National Register of Historic Places as a traditional cultural property, which is a designation under the National Historic Preservation Act that provides the site with a very heightened federal protection. This designation didn't come overnight. It was the product of lengthy historical and archaeological analysis and demonstrates the federal government's recognition of this landscape's national, historical, and cultural significance. The federal government must do whatever it needs to do to protect and preserve it. Transferring this land to Resolution Copper would set a dangerous precedent and contravene the very purpose of the National Historic Preservation Act, which establishes that certain historic properties are so significant to our national heritage that their preservation is in the public interest. This proposed transfer will result in, as we heard, unparalleled destruction of a cultural and in the environmental resources of the Oak Flat area because the proposed mining activity involves drilling 7,000 feet below the surface of the earth, removing, as we heard, 1.4 billion tons of ore. The removal of the ore will ultimately cause a subsidence that will be approximately the size 1.8 miles wide, up to 1,000 feet deep. The figures are astounding, and these come directly from the draft environmental impact statement, which acknowledges the cultural resources within Oak Flat will be adversely affected by leaving federal management, which will result in an unacceptable and a substantial threat to the perpetuation of cultural traditions of the Apache and Yavapai tribes. As a result of these threats to tribal sacred places, there is broad opposition across Indian country to land transfer, which will be unprecedented in its destruction of religious, cultural, and archaeological, historical, and natural resources. In fact, NCAI's membership has recognized this and passed several resolutions through the past decades opposing desecration of sacred sites, and specifically this land transfer, most recently during our annual convention in Albuquerque in October. Accordingly, I call on Congress. The National Congress American Indian calls on Congress. The Indian country calls on Congress to uphold its trust responsibility to tribal nations by immediately repealing Section 3003 of the FY15 NDAA to prevent this destruction of tribal sacred places and cultural resources. In conclusion, I thank you for holding this hearing to address this extraordinary threat to tribal culture and historic resources posed by the transfer of the Oak Flat area, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis. I thank the first panel witnesses for their testimonies, reminding the members that Committee Rule 3D imposes a five-minute limit on questions. The chairman will now recognize members for any questions they may wish to ask the witnesses. I will start by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Ms. Pike, thank you for being here. Your testimony states that Congress has the opportunity to uphold the federal trust responsibility by protecting Oak Flat. Can you expand on why the Oak Flat Land Exchange is at odds with our trust responsibility to Native people, specifically the Apache?
I think that Tonto National Forest's lack of trust responsibility was the lack of not consulting with the St. Carlos Apache tribes in regards to the land transfer. As you can already see with Oak Flat, this is already a lack of responsibility of protecting our religion, protecting our natural resources, and protecting the St. Carlos Apache tribe and their future and welfare of who we are. And so this consultation has never happened between the tribe and Resolution Copper and Tonto National Forest. In the DEIS, the St. Carlos Apache tribe is only mentioned 3 times. That right there shows the lack of how important we are, and not only looking at us as a present and future people, but looking at us as a past history.
Thank you, Ms. Pike. Mr. Dossi, in your testimony, you described the permanent damage that Resolution Copper's proposed mine would have on Oak Flat area, which includes destruction of land, water, plants, and animals, all living things to which Apache people hold a deep spiritual and symbiotic connection with. Can you please tell us how future generations would be impacted if this sacred site were to be permanently destroyed?
The example I can give you is what people practice with their Holy Bible. We talk about these sacred sites in the other side of the world where gifts were given. Well, it's identical here. There's no different. And so if you have the sacred mountain collapsing, subsiding into just a big hole, then what does it do for the rest of our kids that are yet to be born? It takes away from the language, the ceremony, the religious ways that we see the way God had placed his hand on the world here. So how do you describe and how do you say that? And so what we see is a forever desecration to never ever return, and it will harm our children forever. And it'll totally make a different, it'll totally impact the surrounding area, because not only Native people, but people have come to this holy place and have felt it itself. So you can hear that from many non-Indians of America as well, because when you know who God is, then you feel the presence of where it's at.
Thank you, Mr. Nossi. Mr. Alice, as you pointed out in your testimony, Oak Flat is listed on the National Register for Historic Properties. Can you elaborate on why the National Historic Preservation Act is so important to tribal nations?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Great question. So it recognizes the importance of it protecting and preserving cultural heritage in tribal nations. Not only is it listed on the National Historic Preservation Act list, but it's a TCP, okay? And what that means is that it is very unique property, okay? It's a unique location that recognizes the roots to a community's history, okay? That's important for maintaining that community's history and their cultural and religious identity. And it means it's alive, okay? That the practices and beliefs that attached to that location are still going on today. They're alive and well, and why this really needs to be protected. These aren't things that once happened there. These are things that have happened there forever and continue to happen today, and why that's really important to preserving this particular location.
Considering that it is a TCP, traditional cultural property, and the federal government has explicitly recognized it as such, isn't the obligation of the federal government then to protect it, in your opinion? Or is there an obligation for them to do that?
Absolutely. In the trust and fiduciary responsibility that the United States has to Indian country in protecting, as I mentioned in my testimony, lands, rights, cultures, and traditions, this is at the heart of that. And if we're not paying attention to this, and if the United States isn't respecting this and recognizing the significance of what this act would do and how it would harm, and the precedents that it would set in how these sacred sites and how Indian country looks at these, if we're not paying attention to that, that's significant long-term damage that cannot be repaired. As we heard in the testimony, once this is gone, it is gone. It is not coming back. These sites aren't movable or transferable. They are where they are for a reason.
Thank you, Ms. Alice. Now yield to Representative Holland.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Alice, my first question is for you. Will you elaborate on your testimony that highlights the harmful precedent that this land exchange will set for the National Historic Preservation Act, and how the terms of this land transfer will impact future tribal nations?
What it does is in the 11th hour, in the middle of the night, in a provision that's tucked into or an NDAA bill, is it contravenes the entire purpose that Congress built into the National Historic Preservation Act. It does an end around, okay, if you will, the responsibilities that federal agencies have in interacting and engaging and consulting with tribes on the importance of these sites, and discuss ways to either avoid, mitigate, or completely move away from the action that is taken that could damage and impact the site. So if we're not, like I mentioned previously with the chairman's questions, if we're not completely following what was intended and mandated in the National Historic Preservation Act, and allow it to be waived or moved through another legislative act, there's serious long-term damage to Indian country.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis. My next question is for Chairman Mr. Nossi. In November, you informed the Forest Service that you're taking a religious position and assume residence at the Oak Flat Campground in the Tonto National Forest. Will you tell us why you chose to return to your ancestral homeland, and why this is important to the San Carlos Apache tribe, and also the issue that you're fighting for today?
The reason returning back to the Oak Flats was growing up and sitting on the reservation with my uncles and grandfather, and them talking about the promises that the United States made with the Apache people, and that one day we'll be able to return back, and then telling our people that these places are held in trust and protection, that once we become civilized, we'll be able to come back to these places. And so it came to a point where they were hurt, they were crying. There were men that were crying, no longer to be able to go back to what they knew. And I grew up in that era, with my mother being a prisoner of war, being born on the reservation. So growing up and becoming a tribal leader, and knowing my responsibility as a tribal leader, that my responsibility is to protect the people and protect the environment and do the best for what could be for good for all. And I have that same trust responsibility with with the United States, that these are leaders to oversee not just us, but the people of the country. And so when all this was happening and coming to the draft EIS to show the complete ignorance yet, to leave us or put us only in 3 spots and not speak of anything, then I came here to the agency and delivered my letter that I'm returning back to Oak Flats because of their negligence, that I'm no longer going to wait for these promises to happen. I'm no longer going to wait. So I returned back and set up residence and began to take care of the place the way it should be taken care of. And that's where we found many of the things missed in this study that they did. And also the negligence on the Tonto National Forest, because they're more in cooperation with Resolution Copper than with the tribe. And so now I am there to protect and witness what is occurring so that I can explain to the American people, if this goes through, what is a death? What is a murder? Because that's actually what's happening to this holy place.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Pike, first of all, how long have you been advocating, or how long have you been an activist on this issue?
I feel like my entire life, as Indigenous people, our first breath is fighting.
Thank you. Ms. Pike, you speak to the importance of Apache culture and how it is an integral part of your identity. Can you talk about the challenges that you faced in your life as an Apache and how your cultural practices have helped you to overcome those?
I think being here now is one of the challenges that we face as Apache people, as being Indigenous, facing the struggles of fighting for who we are, our language, our land, our resources, our future, and as a woman, having to fight to be able to bear a child and to try to teach that child, my future children, of what it is to be Apache and who it is to be Indigenous, but to take them to a fence with a crater that's 2 miles wide. That is something that I'm fighting. It's for our future. And like my sunrise ceremony, for the boys to sing and do the sweat at Oak Flat, and for me to be able to pick the acorns and the berries, that is what keeps us who we are. That is the thing, the spiritual connection to Nagusan, to our Mother Earth, to Yosin, the Creator, to Chichib Dagot Il, to Zitlan Chasian, and to all sacred sites as Indigenous people is what keeps us here today and now, as being Apache and as being Indigenous.
Thank you. And Chairman, with your permission, if I could just have one more moment. First of all, I wanted to thank Reverend Barber for being here. You're always here to be a voice for underrepresented people, and I personally appreciate your presence here in this hearing room right now so very much. So thank you for coming. I also want to just mention that one of our colleagues, they sent a message saying that we should cancel this hearing because essentially the other side wasn't represented. But I just have to say that I'm sorry I wasn't here when this bill was finagled into the NDAA. I'm sorry that I didn't have a voice in Congress when it was important. And I have to say that when they do things like that, Native people, they're not heard either. That side is never heard. And so I think that if your organization, Apache Stronghold, would have had, a couple $1 million in the bank, you could have hired some lobbyists to come out here and lobby every single Congress member to say, please don't vote for this. Please make sure that stays out of the NDAA, because this will affect the future of our tribe, that perhaps we wouldn't even be having this hearing right now. So I want to say that regardless of what happens, we all have an obligation to stand up for underrepresented people. And definitely for Native American sacred sites that are just bulldozed, blasted. I mean, it's happening across the country. I feel like this is a repeat of a hearing we had just a couple weeks ago when sacred sites were being destroyed. So I want to just mention that and know that I feel like Native folks and their sacred sites, they have waited long enough, and this hearing is proper today. And thank you for showing up. Thank you for coming all the way out here to defend your land and to talk about what's important to you, because your voice has never been heard enough. And Chairman, I yield.
Thank you, Representative Holland. Now I recognize Representative Garcia from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the witnesses who have come this morning to explain the significance of the legislation before us. I am both deeply saddened and angered at the same time that some of the members of this subcommittee would not take the time to come and hear your story, to understand what is at stake and why this is so important for the San Carlos tribe, for the Apache people, and for Native Americans. It is truly unfortunate and tragic that this is happening in the 21st century once again. What are the lessons that we learned? What have we incorporated from our tragic history and the genocide that's been inflicted on the Native American community across our country? And as I ask that question, the answer seems to be pretty clear. We discard the significance of what land means to the original inhabitants of this country, of these lands. We discard whatsoever what faith means and spirituality and what sacredness is to these people. We hear a lot of talk about religious freedom and protecting the rights of people everywhere and their right to worship as they wish, and we cannot practice that in our own country, in our own nation. We cannot uphold that. It is truly shameful. This is a total desecration of religious rights. This is an insult to what is truly sacred to people. Sacredness cannot just pertain to one faith, to one people, to one nationality, to one ethnic group. It has to be embraced and respected for all people. We are not doing that. Finally, we seem to not understand what all of these things mean for culture. Culture is the ability to sustain life, to hand down to your children, to your grandchildren, to your great-grandchildren. And we are desecrating all of that because we refuse to understand the essence of what it is to be a Native person, a Native human being. I am the newest member of this committee, and I am appalled that this is happening right before us, and that we learned some of the history of how this legislation came to be in the first place. It was a parliamentary maneuver done in the dark, violating the process and the spirit of how we seek to pass legislation for all people and to understand all of its consequences In this instance, we have shut our eyes, and darkness has produced an outcome that puts private enterprise, multinational interests over the interests of those who can call this country and these lands their lands. It's a shameful day. I thank all of you for being here today. I thank the chairman for holding this hearing. And I hope that as you continue in your fight for life, in your fight against oppression, in your fight against all of the mighty odds that you are facing, that all of us will come to learn something from it, and that we will be inspired to teach our children the right way, and that the only way forward, if we're to survive as a nation, as a society, and as a world, is to respect the rights of all people. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Representative Garcia. I now recognize Chairman Raul Grijalva.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the hearing. And thank you for not postponing this hearing. I think that is very important. I think there's the historical footnote that Mr. Nossi and Ms. Pike know very, very well about, is that since 2005, 2006, efforts were made to try to create this land exchange to benefit Rio Tinto. It didn't happen. There was no support in the chambers and certainly in the House of Representatives at that time. And so come a must-pass bill, 2014, which was the legislation in which Section 3003 was put in, that facilitated the land exchange. And I was struck, Mr. Chairman, by the other side saying, you know, you should postpone this action because other voices have to be heard that are in support of responsible development there. But I'm glad you didn't, because the voices, as Ms. Holland said, of the tribal folks that are here today and other experts in the second panel and people from that community, it's important to hear those voices. They weren't heard in the middle of the night when it was stuck in that legislation. There was no transparency. There was no honesty. There was no process. It was just done in the behest of a major multinational mining company. That's why it was done. And I think by allowing and giving status and respect to the voices in opposition, that we are doing ourselves a service and doing this issue a tremendous service as well. I want to ask you, Mr. Nossi, because one of the things is that we have, and you know, I think it's a legitimate question to ask. I hope we have some tribal folk in the region that are for the development of this mine, and they couldn't come here because of restrictions in terms of travel and the virus. And your response to that? You know, fine. I feel okay. You're for it, but there are some fundamental things that are going on in Indian country that supersede a lot of things. The pipeline that occurred for the Sioux Nation, Chaco, and the protection of that area for the Pueblos. What's going on with pipelines across this country and through Indian country. Sacred sites being destroyed for the Atham people as we speak. All those things are not protecting our trust responsibility as a Congress and our responsibility to tribes. And more importantly, it is weakening the sacred sites laws. It is weakening ceremonial, cultural resources. And I think those areas, if anything else, need to be strengthened going forward. But I think the biggest sham, and nobody scam, was we're going to do the land trade, then we're going to do some analysis, and regardless of what that analysis says, the land trade goes through anyway. And so there is no opportunity for the tribe or anyone else to be able to affect the change. So you have some tribal leaders in support of it. Your response to that, Mr. Nossi?
Very glad you asked that question because number one is that I think that the government is familiar with it because it happens all over the place. So for instance, the individual that is supposed to be here, the process in tribal government is you got to have approval from your tribal council to speak. And you have to go through the process from your chairman to the council to come here to Washington and to speak on the position of the tribe. But what has happened is that when Resolution Copper has come to Indian country, they've come in with abundance of money and has fed programs and opportunities. They're given thousands of dollars for education. They're in the robotics, and they're helping with churches, and they're bringing all this money in, putting these leaders in a position caught in the middle of where do they go, what do they do? And then they're held accountable for Resolution Copper, and also they're held accountable to make those decisions for the Indian people. And it puts them in a bad position. So I always come back to the point that a lot of these areas are suppressed. So as long as they're suppressed, they could be used in that way. And so, hey, the Resolution Copper knows history. I mean, it's just like, for instance, when John McCain came to me years back, when I talked to him, what he said to me was, hey, look, you're on the reservation. Globe and Miami have been doing this to you, another word, been doing this to you, and all you have to do is develop on your reservation side and take their business because we're going to reroute the highway on that side. I mean, so again, if I was that kind of person of not holding morals, I would probably have jumped to what he was saying. But because the community of Globe, Miami, and Superior were going to be affected, it was not right to hurt those people for somebody's benefit. But those are the maneuvers that happens on the reservation. And it's really sad. But I'm glad for the leaderships, because there are some leaderships that come back and hold everybody together and say, well, wait a minute, you're given an oath of office. And so they're reminded about the oath of office and what it entails. But when you look at how they've spread out into Arizona, this is why you don't have a lot of people here, is because they've already spread their money all out into the different tribes and different communities. Because in the very beginning, when we asked the mayors and council to show us the plan of operation, they never had it. They never had any of that stuff. But we did know that they were being given a lot of promises. And a lot of those promises did not come to fruition because when John McCain gave the exemption, they didn't have to fulfill those obligations anymore. That's why today you have 98, like I said, 9% opposing this, because none of those things filtered through except those that they bought off. And it's sad to say, not only in Indian country, but I think in every race it happens. But when they only point out San Carlos or the Indian people, you know, they structure it in that argument for only us. It's just like Mr. Gosar. I met him, this girl was 9 years old when we met him in White Mountain. And in that discussion with Gosar when he was running for District 1, we told him that this is what Ann Kirkpatrick did not do. So this is the argument. We want NEPA. On behalf of the San Carlos Apache tribe and tribes, we want NEPA. So what he tells us? Oh, I will not do what Ann Kirkpatrick's done. Your voice, the Native American voice, will be on the table, will be there. I will stand for you and for your people. This isn't right. And then what did he do to us? The very next day when he got elected? It didn't happen. But anyway. Oh, okay. So anyway, in closing, I mean, it happens. It happens out there, and it's unfortunate. But I think you guys are familiar with that.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Nossi. I want to thank the first panel for answering our questions. The members of the committee may have some additional questions or statements for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to these in writing. I now invite panel 2 to take their places at the witness table. As with the previous panel, oral statements are limited to 5 minutes, but your entire statement will be part of the hearing record. When you begin, the lights on the witness table will turn green. After 4 minutes, the yellow light will come on. Your time will have expired when the red light comes on, and I will ask you to please wrap up your statement. I will also allow the entire panel to testify before we question the witnesses. Representative Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just as a point of privilege, I would just like to, again, also welcome Reverend Barber. I really thank you for being here today. We appreciate all of the work that you do on behalf of poor people, on behalf of bringing our country together, your fight for religious freedom for all, and of course, your unquenching thirst for human rights for everyone on the planet and certainly in our country. It's great to have you here today. God bless you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Garcia. Now I'd like to introduce our distinguished guests. The chair now recognizes Dr. Stephen Emmerman, an expert in hydrology and geophysics with 31 years of experience and the owner of Mallik Consulting.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify. I'm Dr. Stephen Emmerman. I was a professor of geology for over 30 years. I have studied and worked on issues related to groundwater and mining for over 40 years. I'm not anti-mining by any stretch, but this is the worst mining project I have ever encountered. I will talk about 4 things. 1, underestimation of water consumption. 2, underestimation of electricity consumption. 3, the extent of the crater, especially the potential impact on Apache Leap. 4, catastrophic danger to communities downstream from the tailings dams. My approach is based upon the precautionary principle, which states that one should be ultra-conservative when faced with great danger and great uncertainty. Representative Gosar agreed with this principle in his recent press release by self-quarantining himself due to coronavirus concerns. According to Rio Tinto, the foreign company that owns Resolution Copper, the mine will consume 15,700 acre-feet of water per year. This number has never been justified. Based on copper mining industry standards, 50,000 acre-feet per year would be a better estimate. That is, every year, a column of water covering a football field and 10 miles high. This mine will consume an enormous amount of water simply to transport the tailings through a 25-mile pipeline to the toxic waste dump. Water that is consumed is never coming back. In terms of electricity, the key unknown is the power required to pump out the large amount of nearly boiling geothermal water pouring into the mine and to refrigerate the mine. It will be 180 degrees in the mine. Humans cannot survive at that temperature. The mine could consume 22% of the peak power capacity of the Salt River project, which provides power to more than 2 million people. The peak power capacity is the blackout threshold. According to the DEIS, the block cave mining will create a crater with a maximum depth of 800 to 1,115 feet. Oak Flat will be destroyed. And according to Rio Tinto, the DIS, the closest approach of the subsidence zone to Apache Leap will be 1,115 feet. However, just based upon the uncertainty in the crater depth, the probability that the subsidence zone will reach Apache Leap is 9%. The probability is even greater because there are many questionable aspects of the subsidence modeling of the DEIS. The DEIS simply repeats the claims of Rio Tinto without justification. Tailings are the crushed rock particles that remain from the ore body after the copper has been removed. These tailings will be stored on the surface behind a dam that will be made from the tailings themselves. One of these tailings dams, the Brumadinho Dam, failed in Brazil last year. The flood of tailings traveled 75 miles per hour and killed 270 people. This Brumadinho Dam released 12.7 million cubic yards of tailings. By contrast, the tailings dam at the Resolution Copper Mine will store 1,315 million cubic yards, which is greater by a factor of over 100. It is not a question of if this tailings dam will fail, but when. At the end of the project, Rio Tinto will walk away from this dam and it will receive no further inspection or maintenance so that eventually it will fail. All the proposed sites for tailings dams in the DEIS are upstream from and very close to communities. The Silver King site is 2,500 feet above Superior. The dam at that site would be 1,040 feet high, the tallest tailings dam ever built by an extra 390 feet. The near west site is 19,000 feet above Queen Valley. The Peg Lake site is 10.3 miles above Florence, a town with over 26,000 people. The Skunk campsite is 17,000 feet above Dripping Springs. In the last year alone, 3 countries have restricted the distances between tailings dams and communities. Brazil has said that tailings dams cannot be built where there is a community within 10 kilometers downstream of the dam. That distance can be extended up to 25 kilometers, depending upon population density. Ecuador has adopted the same regulations. China has said that tailings dams cannot be built within 1 kilometer of a community. It should make you stop and think that we are seriously discussing a mining project in Arizona that would be illegal even in China. My recommendation is don't do it. Don't let this project go forward.
Thank you for your testimony. The chair now recognizes Dr. James Wells, a registered geologist with nearly 30 years of experience and the chief operating officer for L. Everett and Associates.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to testify today. My name is Jim Wells. I have a PhD in geology, and I have been a practicing environmental hydrogeologist for nearly 30 years. For the last 7 years, I have advised the San Carlos Apache tribe on environmental and water resource matters. At the invitation of the U.S. Forest Service, I served on the Groundwater Working Group, which advised Tonto National Forest on its preparation of the draft EIS. The working group consisted of Forest Service and Resolution Copper personnel, as well as professionals from US EPA and Arizona state agencies. The scale of this project is hard to fathom. As shown on this slide, Resolution's own assessment acknowledges that groundwater will be depleted over an area covering about 300 square miles. It's not clear how long it will take for these aquifers to recover after the mine closes. It's not in the DEIS, but Resolution once estimated that it would probably take about 1,000 years. Another very long-term impact relates to drying of springs and creeks from the permanent alteration of aquifers due to the subsidence crater. The DEIS acknowledges that many springs, most of which are identified as sacred, would be impacted by dewatering. The Forest Service looked 200 years into the future for spring impacts, even though, because of the scale of this project, they knew these impacts will not have reached their peak in some areas. The Forest Service discounted and did not disclose the worst impacts that are predicted to occur decades and even centuries later. Resolution says it will use about 775,000 acre-feet of water over the life of the mine, of which 70% will be pumped from a network of new extraction wells in the East Salt River Valley. That's 15 miles west of the mine site. This is equivalent to 250 billion gallons of water. That's enough water to supply a city of 140,000 people. This is a vast new water demand for an area of the Southwest that is already experiencing water shortages. The draft EIS acknowledges that this amount of water, quote, could be greater than the estimated amount of physically available groundwater, which is a pretty profound admission for an EIS. Every colored dot on this slide is a municipal well. So you can see there are already a lot of straws drawing water out of this basin. Phoenix, Scottsdale, Tempe, Mesa, Gilbert, Chandler, Apache Junction, and Superior. They all rely on water from the very same groundwater basin. And study after study from Arizona Department of Water Resources and others tell us that there's simply not enough water to go around. Resolution chose to employ block cave mining, thus ensuring creation of a 1.8 mile wide subsidence crater, because that's the cheapest way to mine this deep ore body. A consequence of this mining method is that reclamation and restoration It's simply not possible. These are forever impacts. The subsidence crater may or may not extend into the Apache Leap Special Management Area. At minimum, we do know it will creep up the eastern slope of Apache Leap and profoundly degrade the quality of this theoretically protected place. In 75 years, if we could all stand together on the crest of Apache Leap, instead of the world-class view across Oak Flat, we would see a massive pit of collapsed rock just a couple hundred meters away, devoid of life and gradually filling with toxic mine water. As the chairman mentioned in his opening remarks, imagine standing on the stairs of the US Capitol and, as shown on this slide, seeing nothing but a 1,000-foot deep rocky pit swallowing not only the Smithsonian Museums and the Washington Monument, but extending all the way to the Lincoln Memorial. I'm pretty sure if there was a lot of copper under the mall, we wouldn't be considering building a mine there. In summary, this project has profound environmental impacts, many of which cannot be mitigated. And the draft EIS does not inform the public on the full scope of these problems. Thank you.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Roy Chavez, the former mayor of the town of Superior and the chair of the Concerned Citizens and Retired Miners Coalition.
Thank you very much. Excuse me, I need my glasses now. I've been on this for so long, my eyes aren't that good anymore. Good morning. My name is Roy Chavez, and it is an honor to testify on this important issue today. I am chair of the Concerned Citizens and Retired Miners Coalition, a nonprofit grassroots volunteer group of citizens whose members include local residents, former miners, and friends of the town of Superior. The coalition is not opposed to mining. In fact, we strongly support responsible mining practices in and around our community. I'm a lifelong third-generation resident of Superior. I'm an ASU graduate, and I have served the community of Superior in various capacities as a council member, as mayor, and as town manager. I have also been a small business owner for the past 30 years, and I've worked for several different mining companies, including Hecla Mining, Kennecott Copper, Magma Copper, and BHP. I have experience in open pit mining, smelting, underground mining, construction, development, and production. I will be speaking today specifically on the proposed resolution copper mining project in Superior. The Superior, Arizona Magma Copper Mine operated from the early 1900s until their first closure in 1982. Approximately 1,400 employees were laid off after the mine closed then. When the mine reopened in 1989, it employed less than 400 people, almost a two-thirds reduction in the labor force. Technological changes, including the use of underground loaders, meant that less manpower was needed to achieve the same results. The mine ultimately shuttered again in 1996. After the first mine closure, Superior's population, business revenues, and general operating procedures were greatly diminished. The boom and bust cycle of mining had left the town in an unstable financial position, and we were left to pick up the pieces. During the mid-1980s, Superior decided to diversify the economy away from mining and look to tourism, senior living, and outdoor recreation to better enhance the area and provide a sustainable source of revenue for the future. To achieve this diversification, Superior had to consolidate community service, cut taxes, and undergo a wholesale of modernization to clean up the town and better promote the community. As mayor, I was first approached by Rio Tinto in 1998 about reopening the mine. They referenced a new operation using a block caving mining method and discussed the acquisition of over 3,500 acres of public lands managed by the U.S. Forest Service above Apache Leap and Oak Flat. Initially, I was encouraged by the prospect of the mine reopening and what it could mean to the many folks who had lost their jobs after Magma closed. However, recognizing the technology that was in place and in the late 90s and the overall workforce diminishment, I was very skeptical about the jobs that would actually materialize in this new mine. Resolution was proposing block cave mining, where historically a cut-and-fill method had been used in the region. In a block cave mine, ore is extracted from underneath. Eventually, the earth above the mining operation subsides, leaving a massive crater and forever destroying the surface. Block cave mining is a technologically dependent operation, requiring far fewer labors than traditional cut-and-fill mining. The technology advances in today's mining industry, combined with the block cave method, means only a bare minimum of jobs will be created. It would be no surprise if many of the technical jobs that are available will be held by highly trained individuals sitting at a computer in another state or even another country, controlling our robotic workforce remotely. In order to remove the ore body from block caving, Resolution plans to install 70 miles of underground track. The ore is transported to the surface where it's processed to a concentrate. The concentrate can be smelted and sold at that point. The foreign mining conglomerate of Rio Tinto is majority owner of Resolution Copper, a limited liability company. As China Co., owned by the government of China, is the largest shareholder of Rio Tinto, current mining plans call for transporting the ore to China for final processing and sale. Giving away American natural resources to a foreign conglomerate so it can monetize our resources to enrich shareholders while creating few jobs and an environmental disaster is fleecing the American people. Ladies and gentlemen, Superior and the surrounding communities have worked hard to build a strong and sustainable future for our residents. Resolution Copper's mine is a bad deal for local residents, a bad deal for the environment, and a bad deal for the American taxpayer. Here, if Congress doesn't act, then the government of China wins and the Arizonans and the other Americans lose. I urge Congress to put America first and repeal this special interest land legislation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chavez. I thank all witnesses for the testimony, reminding members that Committee Rule 3D imposes a 5-minute limit, 5-minute limit on questions. The chairman will now recognize members for any questions they may wish to ask the witnesses. I'll start by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Dr. Wells, as you know, the Southeastern Arizona Land Exchange requires an environmental review of the mining project to be conducted. However, the legislation also mandates for the land exchange to occur regardless of the findings of the review. It's just crazy. Can you explain how this reality has affected the environmental impact statement drafting process for this project?
Yes, I can try to explain that. This is not a normal EIS process as it was envisioned under NEPA. Under NEPA, projects are meant to be given a hard look. The projects and the environmental impacts from those projects are required to be given a hard look in a scientifically defensible way. I have worked with the Forest Service on the water resources part of their draft EIS, and I believe there's almost a sense of fatalism as a result of this streamlined process that's just going through the motions to validate a foregone conclusion. And I think that also could explain why the Forest Service didn't always take a critical look at information provided to them by resolution that ended up in many cases in the draft EIS, just sort of verbatim out of resolution reports.
Thank you. In your testimony, you also mentioned specifically that the DEIS fails to fully analyze the effects of Resolution Copper's plan to pump 250 billion gallons of water for its proposed mines. Can you explain what these missing cumulative effects could be?
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to do that. I think that's a really important question. In my view, one of the most valuable contributions the Forest Service could have made in the draft EIS or in the NEPA process would have been to take a clear and thorough look at cumulative impacts. You know, speakers in the first panel spoke movingly about their understanding that the world and life is interconnected. And I think in many ways we, in the world of modern science, aren't very good at incorporating that knowledge. One way that it can be incorporated, maybe imperfectly, is this whole concept of cumulative impact analysis under the NEPA process. Let's take water resources. We know that resolution copper, if this project goes through, is going to use up a whole lot of water. What about a situation in the future which is increasingly likely that there will be a drought emergency in the Colorado River Basin? Arizona depends a lot on water from the Colorado River, as do many other states, supplied through the CAP, or the Central Arizona Project. Once a drought emergency is signified, which could happen any time now, those supplies drop off. And we know exactly by how much. It's all written down in the compact, but there's no analysis in the draft EIS of what we're going to do in a situation in a couple years when there are these vast new demands for water in Arizona, but even less water.
Thank you, Doctor. And lastly, Mr. Chavez, the EIS statement states that the panel caving method was selected for resolution copper's mining proposal and that other mining methods were considered but not analyzed in detail. Appendix F states that other methods were dismissed because of risks associated with surface disturbance and, quote, higher operation costs. As a former miner, could you please give us your views on the decision to approve panel caving without analyzing other methods in full detail?
Yes, the block cave method historically in Superior was never used. We were under a process called cut and fill, and as an example of that, quickly, we would mine out this particular structure here, this office, this building, the hearing committee building, and we would process the material. We would recover all the commodity metal, copper, gold, silver, molybdenum. That'd take about 10% of this room. The remaining 90% would be the toxic mine waste that's being discussed at this point, making up the tailings. In cut and fill operations, though, it is cutting and filling. We would take approximately 80% of that waste material, mix it with concrete, and pipe it back underground and reintroduce it into the vacant ore body area and filling this core. Once that would happen, we could mine the panel here, the panel there, the one above, the one below. You follow? It's like creating a box, a solid box. Cut and fill is labor intense. And when resolution, Rio Tinto mentions block cave mining, that's what they're doing worldwide for the most part. And what it is your number one cost is labor, in their opinion, and they want to cut back on labor. The block cave method is very, very, the extraction process is very high. They would take, not this building or office here, they take this entire building structure, the whole block, 2 blocks, 3 blocks, and they would void it. They would pull it out from below, transport it out, do the same thing in processing, recover the commodity money metals, and then create the waste product and place it on the surface. You know, one thing that's not really being mentioned is that the land exchange is one issue where they want to make it appear that the United States is recovering something for this. We're getting something for the land exchange. But the appraised value of the ore body has not even been discussed, nor have the potential 12 square miles that will be utilized on public Forest Service land to dump the waste forever. We're not getting a penny. Just wanted to share the two differences.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chavez. I now recognize Representative Holland.
Thank you, Chairman. My first question is for Mr. Chavez. Mr. Mayor. As the former mayor of the town of Superior and a lifelong resident, do you feel that the DEIS adequately informs the local public about these risks that you've been talking about associated with this project?
No. We have to remember now in the industry, what they're using worldwide is a social license to operate. And within those boundaries, the Resolution Mine has created a community working group, which I happen to be a member of for 4 years now. Reluctantly, I'm the only member on that 30-member group that is in opposition to this project and has been from the very beginning. The representatives on that group are members of organizations and agencies that have received some type of funding from the Resolution Mine for their organizations and their functions. But the work group spins this information that is now in the study, which was provided for scrutiny for a period of 90 days, several thousand pages. So this process has been going on for over 2 decades, and yet here, just like today, for them trying to cancel this or postpone it, you know, when the cards, you know, aren't on the table for them, they certainly turn on us and want to review. So I would share with you that not many people have looked at that study in an appropriate manner, and I think the people now, the longer this goes on, the more and more people locally, regionally, are asking the question, what's going on?
Thank you.
What is this about?
Do you believe that the Forest Service seems to be expediting a flawed and limited environmental review? And if so, why? And I don't have a whole lot of time, so if you...
Thank you. They were given their marching orders and defined in this, as defined in the special interest legislation. They formulated a supportive analysis of this project, and again, they're going to blame 1872, the U.S. mining law.
Can you speak to the local opposition to Resolution Copper's this mining operation?
I think by every day that goes by, as we said years ago, the longer this takes, the truth will come out.
Okay.
And they're believing now, or they're understanding now, that the jobs and the impact is either going to be destructive or very minimal in regards to the economy of the community.
Well, thank you for standing for the truth. Dr. Emmerman, thank you for your testimony. Thank you. I appreciate that. Have you reviewed Tonto National Forest draft environmental impact statement for the Resolution Copper Mine, which was issued last August?
Yes. First, I read the general plan of operations very, very carefully, word for word, and did the same thing with the DEIS.
So you've reviewed the 1,300-page document in its entirety?
Very carefully, yes.
Your resume indicates that you hold a PhD and a master's in geophysics from Cornell and Princeton University, respectively, and that you majored in mathematics at the Ohio State University. Based upon your extensive background and your individual review of the EIS, would you consider it to be complete and thorough?
Well, the simple answer is no. What we expect from a DIS, it should be very thorough, consider a wide range of environmental impacts, justify its reasoning, and it should be independent. Much of the DIS simply repeats information provided by Rio Tinto, especially the assumptions from Rio Tinto, without investigation. There's many countries in which there's no technical capacity at the governmental level. So, water, to provide the water for this project.
Thank you, and thank you all so much for your expert testimony. It seems to me that if you take 100% of something and you only get 10% out of it and the other 90% is waste, it doesn't seem like it's worth it. But thank you, Chairman. I yield.
Thank you, Representative Holland. Now recognize Representative Garcia.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to the 3 witnesses of this panel. Dr. Wells, in terms of the unprecedented amount of water and to have a tailpipe this far and this close to the community,
beyond the impacts to and streams, or whether it be on the impacts to neighbors' water supplies.
And what will happen to the dam infrastructure that will go unmaintained, as I think you alluded to?
So these things are forever things. You know, the mine will come and go, geologically speaking, pretty quickly, only in 50 years. The tailings pile will be there forever. So once resolution packs up and goes on to the next place, eventually the tailings dam will be unmaintained. And I think, again, I'm a broken record when talking about uncertainty of these scientific predictions. We can't say when that tailings dam would fail, but we do know that someday it will.
And Mr. Chavez, what does the U.S. government get out of a project like this, to your knowledge?
The primary factor under the mining strength and lobby in Arizona throughout the Southwest is jobs, Representative. And those jobs are the priority, I believe, that I've seen politically. This giveaway, though, is by today's market of the industry, is by no means, in my opinion, and many other people in the industry and previously in the industry, is not going to provide these jobs that have been projected. We've heard from 300 jobs to now 6,000 jobs. Some of the jobs are including people that are locally employed in the school district, people at restaurants, but the reality is that it's jobs. And the fact is that those jobs are diminishing. One other thing to remind you is that in Arizona right now, our neighbors down the road in Ray and Hayden are in a strike right now. The labor group is in a strike, and that's going to continue for some time. They're trying to break the union. And that answers something to jobs. I mean, really, legitimately, are these companies really there to support the working force?
So am I to infer from that there is a great cost here to the communities, to the environment, and that whatever is here, it's short-sighted?
I would definitely agree. If you listen to my oral testimony, I mentioned that we were trying to diversify because we couldn't do anything with the mine out. So we had to change things and had to shift gears. And part of that was looking at our environment, our ecosystem, and trying to promote it in that sense. So there's diversification that needs to be implemented here.
Yes. And just to close, all of this is happening because of a midnight rider that is giving our public lands, the sacred lands of tribes, to a corporation. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Now recognize Representative Grijalva. Chairman Grijalva.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Wells, Arizona was part of other states in that the Colorado River sustains that did the drought contingency plan.
Right.
And within 7 years or so, Arizona, like the other states, are going to have some permanency to water usage, conservation, et cetera. Because the point that you made about that finite resource being finite, this drain from this irresponsible mine in terms of the water resources and putting this mine at the top of the list in terms of access to future water usage. Your comment on that?
Well, I mentioned in my testimony that this is the amount of water that would be required by a city of 140,000 people. So if you and I were developers and we went to Arizona and put forth a proposal to build a new city with 140,000 people, the rules that are in place right now for managing groundwater resources would slam that down in no time. So the priorities that mining operations have under Arizona water law do exactly that. They really do raise these kind of projects to the top of the list. And the fact of the matter is that I think it wasn't widely appreciated by folks in Arizona that this mine was going to be drawing so much water, not really from the mine site, although they're drawing a lot of water from the mine site, but from down in the valley, which is part of the Phoenix Active Management Area. This is a part of Arizona that is already running out of water.
And if I may also, Dr. Emmerman or Dr. Wells, whichever, the issue of waste, that what the taxpayer gets is that they get to keep the waste from the mine in perpetuity. The consequences of that, short term, you talked about, we don't know when, but it will become a problem. And that is going to be a cost, because the liability will never be with the mining company. They'll have a sweetheart deal. They'll get out. They have one now. And so it's almost urgent for resource issues to prevent this mine from going forward. Number one, water availability and usage overall in the state is critical. Number two, the 1872 mining law goes against any rational scientific way to look at, and if there's going to be options, let's have options. The lack of full payment and recovery by the taxpayers in terms of any royalties down the line. And then I think and this is why it's so important what San Carlos tribe is doing and what the Stronghold is doing. They're raising a very important issue, a legal obligation and responsibility that this Congress has in terms of the trust responsibility to Native nations and to indigenous people in this country. And the fact that we are not upholding that, and that for a foreign company, we have bent the rules, changed the criteria, and basically jeopardizing economic development, water usage, and communities nearby, in order to sustain a collateral damage, which happens to be the tribe primarily, in order for this mine to prosper. I think that goes to the heart of this hearing, that this has been a disjointed, ugly process to get this permit and to do the land exchange. I think we have an obligation to look at every avenue available to us as a Congress to begin to reverse this. And if we're going to do a study, let's do a real study. Let's put science first. And as Mr. Nossi said, let's look at something that is real science, that is transparent, objective, and peer-reviewed, and not beholden to the company in terms of having to respond to what their priorities are. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to thank our witnesses for their insightful testimony and the members for their questions. As I stated before, the members of the committee may have some additional questions for witnesses, and we'll ask you to respond to these in writing. Under Committee Rule 3.0, members of the committee must submit witnesses' questions within 3 business days following the hearing, and the hearing record will be open for 10 days for these responses. If there's no further business, without objection, the committee stands adjourned. Normally, we would actually stand up and go and shake your hands and thank you for being here, but I think under the circumstances, I hope you'll understand that I do appreciate you being here. I do appreciate our first panel witnesses for being really so instructive and bringing this really to our own, showing your heart and bringing this closer to our heart. I thank you again, and please have safe travels back. Adjourned.